So it was and is the Attorney General's decision to make. It would, however, be Canadians' decision to live with. Specifically, the 9,000 plus people who could lose their jobs, as well as the many thousands more who work on the company's supply chain.
We heard that claim once again today as the Prime Minister's former top advisor gave his long-awaited testimony. If the engineering firm SNC-Lavalin is successfully prosecuted and then barred from federal contracts for 10 years, Canadians across the country will pay with their livelihoods. Well, Diana Swain, our senior investigative correspondent, looked into the jobs.
9,000 jobs on the line, says the government. But how realistic is that? This construction analyst suggests not very.
I think that they're playing the worst case scenario, but I don't necessarily think it is necessarily a likely scenario.
That's because SNC-Lavalin is already involved in billions of dollars of projects in Canada that won't be finished for several years. It's also in the final phases of bidding for other large contracts, like refurbishing the Pattullo Bridge in Vancouver. And those massive provincial projects would still be available to SNC, even if it's shut out of federal contracts. In other words, potentially lots of work still to be had in Canada for the company and its employees, even without a deferred prosecution deal.
How do you walk away from that just because the federal government says, well, we're shutting the door to you for 10 years?
Interestingly, in a recent conference call with shareholders, SNC's CEO, Neil Bruce, was asked how worried he was about losing access to federal work in Canada.
We've got plenty of opportunities to grow the business outside of Canada, but we're also committed to the Canadian, to the Canadian market.
And the lack of a deal here isn't even the company's biggest problem right now, which introduces another intriguing political angle to the SNC story. In late January, it revealed to shareholders it had suffered an operating loss of $1.3 billion in 2018, compared to a profit the year before. It said its oil and gas business in Saudi Arabia in particular had been hurt in part because of difficult intergovernmental relations between Canada and Saudi Arabia. That's a reference to all that's happened since last summer, when a tweet from Global Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland infuriated the Saudi government. Relations haven't recovered. Neither has SNC-Lavalin's share price, which has fallen sharply in recent months.
So, Diana, there's been this suggestion that SNC-Lavalin would have been so frustrated it would move its headquarters out of Quebec to somewhere like the UK, for instance. What are you hearing about that notion?
Well, that's where its largest subsidiaries are based. In fact, it has more employees there right now than here. And one imagines the British government might offer all kinds of incentives to get it there. It could use the good news headlines. But would it make sense for a global company like SNC-Lavalin, which frequently works across borders, to go to a country that hasn't quite figured out what its future relationship will be with any country in the EU? Perhaps not. And it's previously committed to stay here until at least 2024 under a loan agreement. Which brings us back to the question of jobs. And asked today, none of those who testified in Ottawa could pinpoint exactly where this idea that 9,000 jobs could disappear even originated, though we've certainly all heard a lot about that idea in the past month.
Another good question for the Prime Minister tomorrow. Diana, thanks for this.
Thank you.